Cornwall. This is one of the more obscure nations in EU4, with it not even being a starting nation in the game, and it must be released by England for you to play it. On the surface, Cornwall just looks like any other English county, but the difference in Cornwall goes all the way back centuries, when the Vikings didn't conquer the region. Over the centuries, Cornwall has had a separate identity, with them developing their own unique culture and language. Who doesn't love a good Cornish pasty? Tasty. Num num num. Oh, fantastic. Even during the 15th century, many travellers who came to this region were clear that the Cornish were commonly regarded as their own separate ethnic group. One Italian diplomat described the Cornish as poor, rough and boorish. Another French diplomat wrote that England was not a united whole, as it contains Wales and Cornwall, natural enemies of the rest of England, both obviously speaking their own unique languages. In today's video, therefore, we are firstly going to go into the enriching history of Cornwall, and what happened to them around the time of 1444, as well as why Cornwall has actually been added to, with quite a few unique events and general flavour. This nation could even be a good campaign if you're running out of interesting nations to play as. Cornwall today has become more relevant as it has now become one of the poorest counties within the UK. Many Londoners buy tons of holiday homes here, and tourism is quite big, but the economy is very seasonal to generate large amounts of revenue, and therefore it's been difficult for them to generate large amounts of economic activity. Also, I'd just like to say, as we're only a few subscribers away from 100,000, that I can't thank you enough for all the support you've given me over the years. It's been an absolutely amazing experience after making all these wacky and interesting history videos, so thank you so much guys, I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's firstly go from the beginning. Cornwall was first settled by hunter-gatherers in around 10,000 BC, although there was hardly any signs of human habitation. Settlements only actually really took off around the Bronze Age, thousands of years later. This is because Cornwall's natural resources of tin and copper was desirable to mine for the locals, and this occurred between 2400 and 1500 BC. So we can clearly see there was a local demand for Cornish resources around Europe during this time. In EU4, Cornwall also has copper as a trade resource, so it's nice to see some historical accuracy when it comes to the resources within EU4 and what the Cornish actually had in-game. Given the resources it had, Cornwall experiences a trade boom driven by exports across Europe. It is actually thought that Cornwall was visited by metal traders from the Eastern European Mediterranean. The Isles of Scilly was also thought to be first recorded during this time in 500 BC. Over time, the Celts from mainland Europe began to arrive. Compared to the previous settlers, the Celts were far more civilized, with a structured society and were well trained in battle. One of their forts actually remains today, which is known as Treville Ked. Why not go there and have a look out to sea? As the years went by, various ancient Greek historians visited Cornwall. Pythias, a Greek merchant and explorer, described the Cornish as civilized, skilled farmers, usually peaceful, but formidable in war, and this was around 330 BC. Clearly, therefore, the origins of Cornwall is packed with fascinating details. After the Romans came for a few centuries, they built a fort in modern-day Exeter, but not many Roman artifacts can be found west of this fort, so clearly they didn't have much influence over Cornwall. After the Romans left, with the empire collapsing, the Cornish tribe of Domnonia once again took control of the region. This kingdom, however, would not be peaceful, and the Anglo-Saxons turned up to populate England and take control, which obviously led to clashes between the two people. The Celts were initially victorious against the Anglo-Saxons, and we can see this at the Battle of Badon, which stopped the encroachment of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for a period of time. However, the Anglo-Saxons won a decisive victory at the Battle of Deoham decades later, and over the centuries the Cornish people were conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, with Donyath being the last Cornish king, dying in 867 AD. During this time, we also have this strange, but yet fascinating story of how Olaf Tryggvason, who visited the Isles of Scilly in 986 AD, is said to encounter a cleric that led him to Christianise Norway. So it's quite interesting how this small county had a big impact on a big nation. Cornwall would continue to be oppressed by the Wessex kings, but in 1016 AD, the Vikings conquered almost the whole of England, except Canute the Great decided not to take Cornwall, and instead granted them a degree of autonomy for money. With the English succession crisis occurring a few decades later, William the Conqueror took control of England in 1066. The Cornish, however, believed they deserved independence and didn't recognise William's authority. Therefore, in 1067, the Cornish rebelled and tried to take Exeter, but didn't have the resources or numbers to control the Exeter fort, and were crushed by William. The centuries leading up to the EU4 start date are probably not the most exciting times for Cornwall flourishing. After the Cornish rebellion was quelled, the land was given to the Norman king's half-brother, Robert, Count of Mortain. Cornwall over the years was therefore ruled by a series of counts, and I think it's safe to say that Cornwall played a minor part in a series of major English events. While the Cornish were under English control, however, they were still seen as different, and were referred to as Cornish throughout the centuries. In terms of contribution to English historic events, the Cornish militia fought against the Scots in 1235. Later on, during the 100-Year War between France and England, Cornwall definitely played a part. In 1337, the Duchy of Cornwall was established, and was given to the Black Prince. Later in the 100 Years' War, at the Battle of Agincourt, the Cornish archers were known to have served in the English army, and therefore contributed to a major historic English victory. Perhaps when we get to the start of the EU4, we could say that the Cornish had significantly integrated into the Kingdom of England, and nothing really significant occurred around the start date of EU4 within Cornwall. 50 years later, in 1497 though, we are proven wrong, and the Cornish rebelled against the English. Giving context, a series of actions by King Henry VII in late 1496 and early 1497 increased the immediate hardships of many of his subjects, especially in Cornwall. With a threat of invasion from Scotland, Cornwall was taxed heavily, and therefore the people of Cornwall were unhappy and decided to revolt. This rebellion was led by both Michael Joseph and Thomas Flamanck. A statue of them can still be seen today. With an army of 15,000, the Cornish marched towards London. However, as they marched towards London, the rebellion failed to attract any new recruits, and so the spirits of the men dwindled. Once they arrived at London, the king's army was big, and so desertion was high within the Cornish army. Therefore, these brave Cornish men were ultimately crushed by the King of England. It would be interesting though to perhaps have some sort of EU4 event, so that we could acknowledge that this rebellion occurred in Cornwall, and maybe adds a bit more flavour to the nation. Going away from the history of Cornwall before EU4, in Europa Universalis 4, Cornwall has its very own unique national ideas, with some quite good, but then again, some are also quite average. The ones that stand out to me is the ambition, which gives you plus 10% morale of armies. Another one that stands out to me is the Pirates of Penzance idea, which is also fairly good, and this actually leads us on to talk about the Cornish events. Cornwall only has 2 events, but one of them allows you to become a pirate republic, and in my opinion, this is probably one of the more fun governments to play as you can continue to raid the English coast of the British Isles, as well as Northern Europe, making your EU4 nation incredibly wealthy. Although the event Pirates of Penzance refers to a famous opera, Cornwall did have experience of piracy, since it was raided quite a lot, but little was known about its links to piracy. Instead, smuggling was far more common to hear about within Cornwall, since traders wanted to avoid heavy tariffs. Given the fact Cornwall has its own national ideas, as well as quite an interesting start, I don't see why you shouldn't give this nation a go. Although it's become more and more relevant within the UK, being one of the most poor counties, it has a very interesting and unique history in the British Isles. Even today, 8 to 13,000 people speak Cornish. I've personally been to this county a number of times, and you definitely feel like it's very different to the rest of the UK, with loads of surfing, nature, and completely built for tourism. Given everything, although it's quite obscure, it's secretly one of the most interesting nations in EU4 that people tend not to think about. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this gives you some context into this nation. Thank you guys so much again for 100,000 subscribers. All your comments mean so much to me, and I hope to see you guys soon. Goodbye for now. Shout out to our Patreons: J Erickson 321, Shadow Singer, Jado52, Kargon, Flyerton, Henriki, Redguard 76, Xiaomi, and Charlie Demerel. Your support means a lot, guys.